The hall was grand, filled with lights, cameras, and the low hum of whispered conversations. It was one of the most prestigious international summits of the year, a place where leaders from around the world gathered to share visions of progress and unity. Reporters from every major outlet had their pens ready, and cameras were fixed on the stage. The air carried both excitement and tension, the kind that makes people sit a little straighter in their seats. Prime Minister Narendra Modi had just spoken. His words were measured, filled with hope about India's role in shaping the future. He spoke of technology, of youth, of building bridges instead of walls. Many listened with respect, but not all. As he stepped down from the podium, a small group in the audience exchanged mocking smiles. One of them leaned back in his chair, loud enough for the rows nearby to hear, and said, "This is not leadership, this is theater." Others chuckled, some nodding in agreement. The sound was not loud, but in a hall built for respect, it felt sharp, like an insult cutting across the air. Modi, walking back to his seat, did not react. His face was calm, his shoulders steady, but those who knew him could see the weight in his silence. Among those seated close was Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google. He had come to speak about the future of technology and humanity, but at that moment, he could think of nothing else except the sting in the room. He looked at Modi, then at the group who had mocked, and something stirred inside him. Sundar had always believed that respect mattered more than brilliance, that humility mattered more than power, and now, respect itself had been placed on trial in front of the world. He rose slowly from his seat. The hall grew quieter as people noticed him standing. Sundar was not the type to seek the spotlight outside his work. He was known for his soft-spoken nature, his calm manner. So when he walked to the microphone, people expected him to return the event to its planned flow. But instead, he paused, letting silence spread across the hall. "I want to say something," he began softly, his voice calm but clear. "When a leader stands here, sharing his vision, it is not the accent we must hear, not the style we must measure, but the courage and the journey that brought him here." The whispers stopped. Even those who had mocked froze, their smiles fading. Sundar continued. "I grew up in Chennai, in a modest home. My parents saved every rupee they could so I could have a better future. When I listen to Prime Minister Modi, I do not only hear a leader, I hear a voice that comes from the same soil as mine, a voice that carries the weight of millions. Mocking that voice is not clever, it is not strength. It is forgetting that dignity is the foundation of humanity." The room was silent now, so silent that even the sound of the cameras clicking seemed distant. Sundar's words were not loud, not angry, but they carried something deeper. He glanced toward Modi and then back to the audience. The true test of leadership is not whether others agree with every word. It is whether he has the courage to stand and speak for his people even when others laugh. And the true test of us, sitting here, is whether we choose to respond with respect or with insult. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. Modi lifted his head, his eyes glistening not with weakness, but with the gratitude of being understood. The mocking voices lowered their gaze, unable to meet Sundar's eyes, and the rest of the hall erupted into applause. Not polite applause, but the kind that rises from hearts moved beyond politics or position. Sundar stepped back from the microphone quietly. He did not smile. He did not seek recognition. He simply returned to his seat, his face calm, as if he had done nothing extraordinary. Yet everyone in that hall knew they had witnessed something more than words. They had seen grace in action, dignity defended not with anger, but with truth. Yet as she met Adrian Blackwood's piercing gaze, some instinct whispered that keeping that promise would be the hardest battle of all. The contract lay on the table between them, thick with legal language, pages bound in crisp leather that smelled of wealth and power. Elena sat rigid in her chair, her hands clenched in her lap as if loosening her grip would somehow make her resolve slip away. Across from her, Adrian Blackwood watched in silence, one hand resting lightly against his chin. He didn't fidget, he didn't blink too often, he didn't betray a single shred of doubt. He looked like a man who had already won, waiting for her to realize the same. Her pen trembled as she picked it up. Signing her name should have felt like selling her soul, but instead it felt like chains clattering to the floor. The debt that had haunted her every waking thought was gone the moment she scratched her signature across the bottom line. Freedom had come at a price so unthinkable that her stomach churned. She had agreed to give him a child she would love fiercely and protect at all costs, a child she swore would never be a pawn in his cold empire. When she pushed the signed contract toward him, Adrian took it with a quiet satisfaction that made her skin prickle. His gray eyes studied her as though she were a rare acquisition he had secured after a long pursuit. For the briefest moment, she saw something flicker in his gaze, something that looked almost like triumph mixed with hunger. Then it was gone, shuttered behind a mask of control. "You've made the wisest decision of your life, Elena," he said, voice smooth and confident. "You will never have to worry about creditors again. Your café, your freedom, your dignity, all restored." "My dignity was never yours to restore," she snapped, surprising even herself with the sharpness of her tone. For the first time, Adrian's lips curved into something resembling a genuine smile, not mocking, not cruel, but intrigued. "Fiery," he murmured. "I expected fear. Instead, I find a woman who bites." Elena rose from her chair, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. "I agreed to this for survival, Mr. Blackwood. Don't mistake that for obedience." His gaze followed her every move as she turned toward the door. "Survival often breeds obedience," he said softly, as if quoting a lesson life had taught him long ago. "But perhaps you'll prove me wrong." That night she lay awake in her small apartment above the café, staring at the ceiling while the contract replayed in her mind. The agreement was clear. She was not his mistress, not his wife, not his partner. She was simply the mother of his future heir. And yet, the way his eyes had darkened when she challenged him lingered in her memory with an intensity that left her restless. Days passed. The café bustled as always, but now she caught sight of sleek black cars parked across the street too often to be coincidence. Men in tailored suits she had never seen before lingered on the corners with the stillness of shadows. She told herself it was paranoia, but when she turned the lock on her door at night, she couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Then came the summons. A cream-colored envelope slipped beneath the café door after closing, bearing only her name in bold black ink. Inside was a single card with 4 words: "Dinner, tonight, 7 o'clock." Elena's pulse quickened. No address, no signature, but she didn't need either. She knew exactly who had sent it. When she arrived at the towering glass structure that bore the Blackwood name, the doorman greeted her as if he had been expecting her all along. She was led through hushed marble halls to a private dining room high above the city. The lights of Miami glittered below Ike, 1,000 promises she could not trust. Adrian stood at the window, his reflection cast in the glass, his posture commanding yet strangely solitary. "You came," he said without turning, as if he had never doubted she would. "I came to make one thing clear," she answered, forcing steel into her voice. "I signed your contract. I'll honor my word. But this is not your victory, Adrian. This is survival, nothing more." At that he turned, and the power in his gaze hit her like a physical force. "Survival has a way of blurring into something else," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "You think you can keep your heart untouched in this arrangement, Elena. But every empire I've built began with someone underestimating me, and you, most of all, cannot afford that mistake." Her breath caught, a war waging inside her chest. It was only the second chapter of their bargain, and already the lines between survival and surrender were beginning to blur. The night had not been planned that way. Elena told herself she would keep it clinical, detached, just as the contract dictated. But when she stepped into Adrian Blackwood's penthouse, the air itself seemed charged, thick with something neither of them had anticipated. The city lights poured in through floor-to-ceiling windows, glittering like 1,000 witnesses to the bargain they had struck. He was waiting, jacket gone, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to his forearms. For the first time, He looked less like the untouchable tycoon and more like a man standing on the edge of something dangerous. Elena's steps faltered. She had rehearsed how she would distance herself, how she would turn this into nothing more than obligation. Yet the intensity in his gaze melted every line she had drawn. He approached slowly, not like a predator, but like someone afraid the slightest wrong move would break the moment. "This doesn't have to mean anything," she whispered, though her voice trembled with doubt. His eyes darkened as he reached for her, not with force, but with something far more unsettling: hesitation. "It already means more than I intended," he admitted. The words struck her harder than his touch. Adrian Blackwood, master of contracts and control, confessing weakness? She wanted to laugh, to push him away, to remind him and herself that this was business. But when his hand brushed her cheek, the carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. What followed was not transactional. It was fire and surrender, anger and longing tangled together until Elena no longer knew where survival ended and desire began. Every kiss felt like a betrayal of her vow to remain untouched, yet every moment only bound her tighter to the man she had sworn to resist. When it was over, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Adrian stood by the window again, but now his reflection looked different, less certain, less composed, as if the foundations of his carefully ordered life had cracked. Elena sat at the edge of the bed, pulling the sheets tightly around herself, trying to gather the pieces of her scattered resolve. "This changes nothing," she said at last, forcing the words out even as her body betrayed her with the memory of his touch. Adrian turned, his expression unreadable, though his eyes burned with something she couldn't name. "It changes everything," he said quietly. The next morning, she expected distance. Instead, she found him waiting in the kitchen, preparing coffee with a familiarity that unsettled her even more than his intensity the night before. The billionaire who commanded empires now stood barefoot in his own kitchen, pouring her a cup as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You don't have to play house," Elena said, her voice sharper than intended. He placed the cup in front of her, meeting her eyes without flinching. "I don't play, Elena. Not with you." Her stomach tightened with unease. She had signed a contract that promised security in exchange for a child, but after one night, she realized the greatest danger was not losing her café or drowning in debt. The danger was Adrian Blackwood himself, and the way her heart, traitorous and unguarded, had begun to race not from fear but from something far more dangerous. She had promised herself she would never fall. But as his gaze lingered, as the silence between them thrummed with unspoken questions, Elena knew she was already slipping toward an edge from which there would be no return. Elena thought the hardest part would be enduring Adrian's presence, but the true test came after the doctor confirmed what she already suspected. The pregnancy was real. The tiny flicker on the ultrasound screen made her throat tighten, equal parts wonder and terror. She should have felt triumphant. The contract was secure, her debts erased. Instead, she felt the ground beneath her shift into unfamiliar territory. This wasn't just business anymore. This was life, a life growing inside her. Adrian was there in the doctor's office, silent, his gaze fixed on the monitor. His face betrayed nothing, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his chair. He looked like a man who had conquered everything only to find himself undone by a single heartbeat. On the drive back, the silence between them was heavy. Elena stared out the window, her hand pressed protectively against her stomach. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual, stripped of its usual certainty. "You'll have everything you need. Doctors, security, a home better suited than that crumbling apartment above your cafe." Her head snapped toward him, fire in her eyes. "I don't want your penthouse. I don't want your bodyguards standing on every corner, and I don't want you deciding where I live as if I'm some fragile investment you need to protect." His jaw tightened. "This isn't about control, it's about safety." "That's what men like you always say," she shot back. "Safety, protection, as if it justifies taking over every choice until there's nothing left of me." For a moment his expression cracked, something raw flickering in his eyes. He looked away, and she realized her words had struck deeper than she intended. Still, he didn't argue further. Instead, he pulled the car to a stop in front of her cafe and simply said, "If you insist on staying, then at least let me ensure no harm comes to you. There are people who would use this child against me." The way he said it sent a chill down her spine. She had seen the kind of enemies a man like Adrian could make. And though she despised the thought of him monitoring her every move, she couldn't dismiss the unease that settled in her gut. That night, as she closed up the cafe, she noticed a man lingering across the street. He wasn't one of the usual late-night customers or neighbors. He stood too still, his gaze too fixed. When she glanced back a second time, he was gone. The encounter left her heart pounding. The following morning, Elena found a bouquet waiting on her doorstep. Not roses, not lilies, but sunflowers, her mother's favorite. No note, no name. She carried them inside with shaking hands, torn between warmth and fear. Was this Adrian's way of softening his control, or someone else's way of getting close? Later that week, she confronted Adrian, slamming the flowers down on his desk in his towering office. "Did you send these?" His brows furrowed as he studied them. "No." Her stomach dropped. "Then who did?" For the first time, she saw something like alarm flash across Adrian Blackwood's controlled features. He stood abruptly, crossing the space between them. "From now on, you don't walk alone at night. You don't ignore unknown numbers, and you tell me everything. Do you understand?" The command in his voice ignited her temper. "You don't get to dictate my life." His reply was a near growl, low and dangerous. "You're carrying my child. That means your life is no longer just yours." Elena's breath caught, not from his dominance, but from the truth buried in his words. The child inside her had already begun to change everything, and while she swore she would never give him her heart, some part of her already feared she had given him far more than she intended. In the reflection of his office window, she saw his gaze lingering on her, not with cold calculation, but with something darker, more possessive, and far more dangerous. For the first time, Elena wondered if the true threat wasn't the enemies outside Adrian's empire, but Adrian himself, and the way he had begun to unravel her defenses piece by piece. The weeks that followed were a blur of unease and restless nights. The mysterious sunflowers had never been claimed, and though Adrian doubled the security near Elena's cafe, the sight of men in black suits watching her every move only reminded her that her life was no longer her own. Customers noticed too, whispering about the guards, wondering what kind of trouble their favorite cafe owner had stumbled into. Elena smiled through it all, but inside, fear and anger knotted tighter with each passing day. Adrian visited often, sometimes under the guise of checking on her health, other times simply appearing without explanation. Each time, his presence unsettled her in ways she couldn't admit. He was no longer just the cold man who had bought her womb with a contract. He was shifting, unpredictable, sometimes dangerously close to being tender. One evening, he sat in the corner of the cafe, long after the last customer left, watching her wipe down tables. "You're working too much," he said finally, his tone firm. She didn't even look at him. "That's what cafe owners do. We work. Some of us don't have empires to lean on." He rose. Zian crossed the room, his shadow falling across her. "You do now. Mine." Her rag stilled against the table. "Don't say that like I belong to you. I signed a contract, Adrian. I didn't sell myself." His gaze locked on hers, intense and unreadable. "You're right. You didn't sell yourself. But whether you like it or not, you are tied to me. Every breath you take now affects the air you carry. That makes your safety my responsibility." "Your responsibility," she repeated bitterly, shoving the rag into the bucket, "or your control." Before he could respond, the cafe door banged open. A gust of wind swept in, carrying with it the night chill, and a man Elena had never seen before. He was tall, lean, with eyes sharp as glass. He ignored her completely and focused on Adrian. "Blackwood," he drawled. "Still playing house with your pretty little deal?" Adrian's body went rigid, his hand subtly moving to shield Elena, though he never touched her. "Victor," he said flatly. The name made the air colder. Elena had heard it whispered before. Victor Steele, Adrian's rival, ruthless in ways that made even Adrian seem merciful. The man's gaze flicked to Elena's stomach, and his smile curved into something cruel. So it's true, Victor murmured. The empire builder finally found a legacy worth bleeding for. Adrian's jaw tightened. You shouldn't be here. Victor stepped closer, his presence radiating menace. You've taken things that should have been mine, Blackwood. Companies, contracts, power. But this? His eyes cut to Elena, and the malice in them made her skin crawl. This is the sweetest theft of all. Elena's breath caught. She had no idea what game these two men were playing, but she understood one thing with chilling clarity. She was the pawn. Adrian moved forward then, his voice low and deadly. If you so much as look at her again, Victor, I will bury you so deep, the world forgets you ever existed. Victor laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. Careful, Blackwood. Love makes men reckless, and you've never been more vulnerable than you are right now. With that, he turned and strode out into the night, leaving silence heavy in his wake. Elena's knees nearly gave out, and she gripped the counter for balance. What was that? She demanded, her voice shaking. Adrian didn't answer immediately. He stood staring at the door, fists clenched, every muscle in his body coiled. Finally, he turned to her, his face unreadable, but his eyes burning with a fire she had never seen before. That, he said softly, was a warning. Elena wrapped her arms around her stomach, suddenly more aware than ever of the fragile life growing inside her. For the first time since signing the contract, she wondered if the true danger wasn't in her bargain with Adrian, but in the enemies it had awakened. Elena barely slept after Victor Steele's intrusion. Every creak of the café floorboards, every shadow outside her apartment window made her pulse thunder with dread. She told herself she was imagining things, but deep down she knew the truth. Victor hadn't come to taunt Adrian. He had come to mark her. She was no longer just a woman bound by a contract. She was a target. The next morning, Adrian was already waiting for her outside the café, his black car gleaming under the sun. He didn't ask if she wanted to ride with him. He simply opened the door. Normally, Elena would have bristled at the assumption, but after the chill in Victor's voice, she slid inside without protest. You should have told me about him sooner, she said finally, as the car pulled into traffic. Adrian's expression was hard, his gaze fixed on the skyline. Telling you wouldn't have kept him away. Steele is obsessed with tearing down everything I build. He sees you as leverage. Her hands clenched in her lap. Lever? Age? I'm carrying a child, not a bargaining chip. His eyes cut to hers, sharp as steel. To me, you're not a bargaining chip. To him, you're a weapon. The weight of his words sank in. She wanted to tell him to keep his war out of her life, but it was too late for that. She was already entangled in battles she didn't understand. Later that week, Elena locked the cafe after closing and started up the narrow stairwell to her apartment. Halfway up, the lights flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. Her heart stuttered. She fumbled for her phone, the glow of its screen barely illuminating the shadows. Then she heard it, a soft scrape, like a shoe brushing against concrete. Who's there? Her voice shook despite her effort to sound steady. Silence, then a low chuckle that made her blood run cold. Before she could react, strong arms yanked her back. She twisted, kicked, fought, but her captor only tightened his grip. A cloth pressed against her face, sharp with chemicals. Panic clawed at her chest. Her last coherent thought before the darkness swallowed her was of the child inside her, the life she might not get the chance to protect. When she woke, she was lying on a cold floor, wrists bound, the faint glow of a single bulb overhead. The room smelled of damp concrete and rust. Her head pounded, her throat dry, and then she heard footsteps. Victor Steele stepped into the light, his smile as sharp as a knife. Awake at last, he drawled. I wondered what it would take to break the Blackwood mask. Now I know. Her pulse roared in her ears. What do you want from me? She demanded, forcing her voice steady. Victor crouched beside her, eyes glinting with cruelty. What I've always wanted? To watch Adrian Blackwood lose. And now, thanks to you, I finally have the perfect weapon to make it happen. Fear surged through her, but so did fury. She would not let this man reduce her to a pawn. You're underestimating him, she said coldly. Victor's smile widened. No, my dear. I'm counting on him, because men like Adrian don't think clearly when love is involved. And after one night with you, I think it's safe to say your contract is no longer the only tie that binds you. Her heart stopped. The cruel certainty in his voice cut deeper than any knife, because she knew he was right. Adrian wasn't just fighting for an heir anymore. He was fighting for her, and that made all of them dangerously vulnerable. Adrian Blackwood had always been a man who thrived on control, but when he received the encrypted message with a single grainy photo of Elena bound to a chair in some forgotten warehouse, all control shattered. The message was short and merciless. Come alone or she disappears. There was no demand for money, no negotiation. It was a trap designed to gut him, and he knew it. But the sight of Elena's terrified eyes erased every thought of strategy. For the first time in his life, Adrian was not thinking like a businessman. He was thinking like a man about to lose the only woman who had ever mattered. At the same time, Elena sat in that cold room, listening to the dripping of water through rusted pipes and the echo of Victor Steele's footsteps as he circled her like a vulture. Her wrists ached from the ropes, her body sore from the hard chair, but her mind burned hotter than fear. She refused to be the reason Adrian fell. She refused to let her child be born into Victor's twisted war. You think he'll come for you? Victor taunted, leaning close enough that she could smell his cologne, sharp and metallic. Of course he will. Blackwood can't resist playing the savior, especially now. He wants you, Elena, more than he wants to admit. And when he walks through that door, I'll finally watch him crumble. Elena met his eyes, forcing her voice to stay steady. You don't know him as well as you think. Victor's smile irked. On the contrary, I know him too well. His weakness is standing right in front of me. The door creaked then, and her heart lurched. Adrian stepped inside. No guards, no entourage, just him. His suit was immaculate, but his eyes told a different story. Storm dark, cold with fury, and blazing with something far more dangerous than fear. Let her go, Adrian said, his voice a blade. Victor laughed softly. And lose my only advantage? You disappoint me, Blackwood. I expected more cunning. Adrian's gaze didn't waver. You want to destroy me, Victor? Then do it directly. But if you touch her, if you so much as breathe wrong in her direction, I swear you'll regret being born. The tension snapped taut like a wire. Victor's men shifted in the shadows, ready for violence. But something in Adrian's voice froze the room. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't negotiation. It was a promise carved in steel. Elena's pulse thundered. She had seen Adrian ruthless in boardrooms, decisive in their private battles. But this was different. This was raw. This was personal. For the first time, she realized he wasn't here because of the contract, or even the child. He was here for her. Victor tilted his head, studying him. Interesting. The great Adrian Blackwood, undone by a café girl with debt. Tell me, Adrian, when did she become more than a contract? Was it before or after you fell into her bed? Adrian's jaw flexed, but his eyes softened for the briefest moment as they flicked to Elena. She became everything the moment she stopped fearing me. The words hit Elena like a thunderclap. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, only stare at the man who had stripped himself bare with a single confession. Victor sneered. Pathetic. Love makes fools of kings. And now, Blackwood, you'll pay for it. The room erupted. Victor snapped his fingers, and armed men surged forward. Adrian moved with lethal precision, faster than Elena thought possible. He wasn't just a tycoon. He was a man who had prepared his entire life for war. The fight was brutal, fists and weapons colliding in a storm of violence. Through the chaos, Adrian cut her ropes free, his grip firm around her wrist. We're leaving, he said, his voice low but fierce. They ran, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Elena stumbled, but Adrian caught her, pulling her close, shielding her with his body as bullets cracked the air. They burst through a side door into the night, breathless and trembling, adrenaline surging like fire through their veins. For a moment, they leaned against the wall of the alley, both gasping for air. Adrian's hands framed her face, his forehead pressed to hers. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered. Her heart stuttered at the vulnerability in his voice. "You almost did." In that instant, surrounded by danger and darkness, Elena realized the truth she had been running from. This was no longer about a debt, or a contract, or even survival. Something far more dangerous bound them together now, something neither of them could control, and Victor Steele would not stop until he ripped it apart. The night after their escape did not bring peace. Adrian had taken Elena to a secluded estate outside the city, guarded by men he trusted with his life. The mansion was beautiful, but Elena felt the weight of invisible chains the moment she stepped inside. Every window was reinforced, every door secured, every corner patrolled. It was safety built on confinement, and it left her torn between gratitude and suffocation. Adrian stayed close, almost too close. He didn't bark orders as before, but his presence followed her like a shadow. He brought her food she barely touched, placed blankets around her shoulders when she shivered, and never once let her out of his sight. Yet his eyes told her more than his gestures, the eyes of a man haunted by the near loss of something he hadn't known he needed until it was almost taken. But the danger was far from over. That evening, a storm rolled in, thunder rattling the windows. Elena was in the drawing room, staring at the fire, when Adrian entered carrying a folder. His expression was grim. "Victor isn't finished," he said, laying the folder on the table. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance shots of her café, of Lila locking up, of Antonio laughing with a customer, even of her father's gravestone. Each one was marked with a date and time. Elena's chest tightened. "He's targeting everyone connected to me." Adrian's voice was low. "It's not just about you anymore. He wants to dismantle anything that matters to either of us. That includes your café, your friends, your past. He wants to make you believe you're never safe." Her hands trembled as she closed the folder. "So what do we do? Hide here forever? Let him win?" Adrian crouched beside her, his hand hovering near hers, but not touching. "No, we fight back, but not recklessly. Steele thrives on chaos. If we move too soon, he'll use it against us." Elena met his gaze, seeing the flicker of torment behind his control. "You mean he'll use me against you?" Adrian didn't deny it. Instead, he said quietly, "When I walked into that warehouse, I wasn't afraid of Steele's men, or even of dying. I was afraid of what losing you would do to me. That is the only weakness he has found, and I'll be damned if I let him exploit it again." The confession struck deeper than she expected. Her heart stuttered, torn between fury and an ache she could no longer deny. She wanted to hate him, to remind him this all began as a contract, a cruel bargain struck in desperati. But the way he looked at her now, not as property, not as leverage, but as the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. It unraveled her defenses thread by thread. Suddenly the lights flickered. The storm outside roared louder, but this wasn't thunder. It was the distant hum of engines, too many to be coincidence. Adrian was on his feet instantly, his voice sharp as he barked orders into his phone. "Perimeter breach. Steele's men are here." Elena's blood ran cold. The safe house, guarded and fortified, had been compromised. She rushed to the window, heart hammering, and saw the glint of headlights through the trees, dozens of them. Adrian grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a hidden passage behind the fireplace. "We don't have time. We move now." The walls trembled as the first explosion shook the estate. Glass shattered somewhere above them, and shouts echoed through the halls. Elena's breath came in short, panicked bursts, her free hand clutching her stomach. Adrian's grip tightened as he pulled her into the darkness of the passage. "Listen to me. I don't care what happens to me out there. All that matters is you and the child. Do you understand?" Elena stared at him, her fear colliding with something sharper, something she didn't want to name. "Don't you dare talk like that. If you fall, I fall too." His eyes softened for a fleeting second, even as chaos raged outside. "Then we fight together." And as the secret passage sealed behind them, cutting off the glow of fire and the sound of battle, Elena realized the truth she had been running from since the beginning. Adrian Blackwood was no longer just the man who had bought her womb with a contract. He was the man whose survival had become as vital to her as her own. But in the shadows ahead, she knew Victor Steele was waiting. and he would stop at nothing until one of them was destroyed. The hidden passage twisted like a serpent beneath the estate. Adrian moved quickly, guiding Elena through the damp stone corridor lit only by dim emergency lamps. Behind them, the sound Ds of battle echoed faintly, gunfire muffled by layers of concrete, yet every blast reminded Elena how close danger still lurked. Her chest tightened with each step, but she forced herself forward. She was no longer just walking for herself. She was walking for the child inside her. At last, the passage opened into an underground garage. Adrian's most trusted men were waiting beside two armored vehicles. Their faces were hard, their weapons ready. One of them, a scarred veteran named Cole, glanced at Elena and gave a sharp nod. Safe routes prepared, but Steele's men are moving faster than we expected. They'll be on our tail within minutes. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then we buy enough time to get her clear. Elena gripped his arm, her fear rising. No, I'm not leaving without you. He turned to her, his eyes fierce, yet softened by something more fragile. If it comes to choosing between me and you, Elena, you don't hesitate. You survive. Our child survives. That's all that matters. She shook her head, refusing his grim resolve. You don't get to decide that alone anymore. If we're fighting Steele, then we do it together. Before he could argue, Cole's voice cut through the tension. We move now. They're here. Engines roared to life, and the convoy shot out into the storm. Rain pounded the windshield, headlights cutting through sheets of water. In the rearview mirror, Elena caught the glow of pursuit vehicles, sleek and black, closing the distance like predators, scenting blood. Adrian gripped the wheel himself, his focus razor sharp. Hold on. The chase tore through the back roads, tires hissing on wet asphalt. The enemy cars gained, their silhouettes monstrous against the storm. Suddenly one swerved forward, ramming the rear of Adrian's vehicle. Elena cried out, clutching the seat as sparks exploded. Adrian spun the wheel with surgical precision, forcing the attacker off balance. They want you alive, he said through gritted teeth. That's the only reason we're still breathing.